At 0:38 hours local time, across a dozen dispersed sites in central Ukraine, operators began the most precisely backwards countdown of the war. The target was the Kstovo refinery complex outside Nizhny Novgorod, one of Russia's largest, processing over 300,000 barrels of crude per day. It sat 900 kilometers from the nearest Ukrainian launch site, and the drones heading for it were launching last. That sounds wrong. It wasn't. Drones bound for closer targets, substations near Bryansk, a fuel depot outside Smolensk, radar installations along the border, had already been in the air for 20 minutes, cruising at fuel-efficient speeds. The Kstovo package launched after them but flew faster, burning through fuel at a higher rate, specifically so that every strike across a 1,000-kilometer front would land inside the same narrow window. The planning team had worked the math backward from a single number: 20 minutes. That was how long Russian air defense commanders would have to decide what to protect once the first wave appeared on radar. 20 minutes to sort real threats from decoys, allocate interceptors across a dozen simultaneous axes, and make choices they couldn't undo. Ukraine wasn't attacking one refinery. It was attacking the decision cycle of everyone trying to stop it. Within 90 seconds of the first launch, Russian early warning radars in occupied Donetsk had already painted the initial wave. These systems can track a baseball at 60 kilometers. Dozens of climbing drones might as well have been a flare. Data flowed into Russia's integrated air defense network. Interceptors scrambled. Commanders leaned into their screens. And every one of them was about to discover that the system they'd spent decades building had been designed to solve the wrong problem. Russia built its air defense architecture to stop American stealth bombers worth $2 billion each. Its interceptor missiles cost millions. Its fighter jets burned tens of thousands in fuel per hour. Now it was being asked to stop drones that cost less than a mid-range sedan, arriving in numbers that made every missile fired a losing trade. Shoot one down? Congratulations. You just spent more on the bullet than the target was worth. Let one through? Congratulations. You just lost a refinery. Every option was a loss. The only question was which loss Russia could afford. The Kstovo package, 28 drones total, pushed northeast through the dark at 200 kilometers per hour. Behind them, the main swarm of over 300 continued east and south, pulling Russian attention across every compass heading at once. The 28 were alone now, threading the gap between Belarusian airspace and the Russian border, heading for a refinery that processed enough crude oil every day to fill an Olympic swimming pool roughly 12 times over. The package split immediately into what the planners called a stack. 3 altitude bands, 3 different jobs, each one designed to defeat a specific layer of the defense waiting ahead. At the top, climbing to 3,000 meters, 4 Mugan 5 decoys. Modified commercial airframes carrying radar reflectors, simple aluminum corner cubes that made a drone the size of a suitcase look like a bomber on a radar screen. They broadcast on known drone control frequencies, deliberately. They wanted to be loud. They wanted to be chased. At $30,000 each, their entire purpose was to die first and die usefully. In the middle tier, at 1,500 meters, 12 UJ-22 airframes. Some carried real warheads. Others carried ballast, weighted to fly identically. Their job was to absorb the medium-range interceptors, Buk and Tor missiles, and force the batteries to empty their rails. Every missile spent on a UJ-22 was a missile that wouldn't be there for the strikers. And at the bottom, diving to 50 meters, the 12 FP-1 strikers. The ones that actually mattered. At treetop altitude, they disappeared into ground clutter, the electronic noise that every ground radar creates when its beam bounces off trees, buildings, vehicles, and the planet itself. Physics was their armor, the Earth's curvature their shield. At 50 meters, a drone vanishes from a ground-based radar beyond about 30 kilometers. Not jammed, not stealthy, just hidden by geometry. Here's why the stack worked. Each altitude band pulled fire from a different defense layer. The high decoys triggered the strategic systems, S-300s and S-400s, designed for bombers. The middle UJ-22s drew tactical missiles from Buk and Tor batteries, and the low strikers slipped through the gap between the two, in the seam where one layer's coverage ended and another's hadn't started. A missile climbing to 3,000 meters physically cannot hit something at 50. The vertical spacing made it impossible for one shot to threaten 2 tiers. The first Russian response came from a pair of interceptors scrambling from a base to the northwest. Their radars are among the most powerful ever fitted to fighter aircraft, built to track heavy bombers at extreme range. But that power was a weakness against this threat. The radar uses narrow, focused beams optimized for searching the high sky. Trying to find a small drone at treetop level with that system is like using a telescope to find an ant on the floor. The pilots locked onto the high Mugen 5s immediately. Big, bright, easy. Doctrine required visual confirmation before firing. By the time they confirmed and engaged, the real strike package had opened a 40-kilometer lead below. The decoys were performing exactly as designed, dying loudly, dying visibly, and pulling every set of eyes upward while the strikers crept through the basement. At 03:45 hours, 200 kilometers from the refinery, the package entered the engagement zone of an S-300 battery. Its phase array radar began tracking them immediately. This is a system that frequency hops across the X-band 100 times per second. 8 GHz, 12, 10, 9, never the same frequency twice. You can't jam it because by the time you react, it's already moved on. On paper, it's unjammable. But Ukraine had found its keyhole. Through data gathered from previous strikes, they'd identified that every 10 seconds, the system must recalibrate its frequency hopping sequence. For exactly 500 milliseconds, it goes silent. Half a second of blindness, 10 times a minute. If you know when that gap opens, you can vanish into it. One Mugen 5 decoy climbed to 5,000 meters, deliberately triggering an engagement. The S-300 launched, a missile worth orders of magnitude more than its target. In the 2 seconds before impact, the doomed decoy transmitted one thing: the radar's timing pattern. Its destruction provided the synchronization data the rest of the swarm needed. 27 seconds later, when the radar entered its recalibration gap, the remaining drones dove to 10 meters. For half a second, they were invisible. When the radar resumed, they were buried in ground clutter. The operators saw ghost returns, maybe birds, maybe atmospheric noise. Without solid tracks, they couldn't fire. The swarm had punched through the window that a dead decoy had pried open. But the next layer wasn't made of missiles or radar, it was made of lies. A Pol-21 electronic warfare system activated across the approach corridor using a technique called beaconing, recording real GPS signals and rebroadcasting them with carefully calculated delays. The drone's receivers showed them over empty farmland when they were actually over towns. 5 minutes of position data, all fiction. 2 drones followed the spoofed fix toward a river crossing that didn't exist and crashed into a forest. 3 more, their magnetic compasses pulled off course by a large industrial complex below, drifted toward a heading that would have taken them into Belarus. They never arrived anywhere useful. But the lead group had already switched to backup navigation, and the backup was almost stupidly simple. Magnetic heading combined with counting high-voltage power line crossings. The transmission lines running from central Russia toward Nizhny Novgorod are fixed infrastructure. Bolted to the earth, mapped to the meter, impossible to spoof or relocate. Each major crossing was a waypoint. 7 lines between the border and the target. The drones were navigating by counting objects that no electronic warfare system could move. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't precise. 2 drones miscounted after a line split into parallel routes and drifted east of the corridor. But the core group's count matched expectations. They were on course for Kstovo. The package, now down to 19, pressed through thickening morning haze toward the glow of the refinery on the horizon. At 05:30 hours, the refinery's lights became visible. An industrial complex that never sleeps, radiating heat and light across the Volga plain. 4 Panzer batteries protected it, positioned for overlapping fields of fire. The remaining UJ-22s split into groups, each one targeting a different Panzer position. The operators on those batteries faced the same arithmetic that breaks every point defense system in this war. They could track all the incoming drones. They could only engage a handful at a time, and every missile in the air was a missile not available for the next target, and the next target was already 15 seconds closer. 12 missiles launched simultaneously. The UJ-22s began evasive maneuvers, but against interceptors pulling 30G turns, maneuvering only delays the math. 9 UJ-22s went down. 3 survived long enough to force a second salvo. Their sacrifice bought the exact commodity Ukraine needed: time. 15 seconds of reload gap during which the Panzer batteries were blind, deaf, and reloading. The FP-1 strikers sprinted through that gap at treetop height. By the time fresh missiles sat on the rails, the strikers were inside minimum engagement range. The pantsers switched to their twin 30mm cannons, airburst rounds that scattered tungsten fragments in calculated clouds along predicted flight paths. But the FP1s had been programmed with random altitude jinks every 2 seconds. Up 10 meters, down 5, up 3, down 8. No pattern for the fire control computer to learn. The predictive targeting was shooting at where the drones should have been, not where they were. 2 FP1s flew into tungsten clouds and disintegrated. Another caught the edge of a burst and lost half a wing but kept flying, its gyroscope compensating wildly. The rest cleared the cannon envelope at 500 meters from the perimeter. The pantsers couldn't depress their guns low enough to follow without hitting their own positions. They were through the main defense. But Russia had one more card on the table, and it was the most dangerous system any of these drones had ever faced. A Derivatsiya-PVO sat on a modified armored chassis near the refinery's main processing block. Its 57mm autocannon was already tracking. This isn't just another anti-aircraft gun. It was specifically built to kill drone swarms. Its shells carry programmable fuses. A laser rangefinder measures exact distance to each target, then programs every round as it leaves the barrel. The shell counts its own rotations in flight and detonates at precisely the calculated range, not on impact but in front of the target, spreading 200 tungsten balls in a 10-meter sphere. The drone flies into a wall of metal it never sees coming. The system's computer was already calculating a barrage solution, overlapping kill spheres at staggered distances, a 3-dimensional grid that nothing small should be able to fly through. The gun elevated toward the lead drone at 200 meters altitude. The first shell detonated too far to do damage, but close enough to reveal the pattern. The second shell landed closer. The computer was walking its fire inward, each round tighter than the last. The third shell detonated 8 meters from the lead FP1. 200 tungsten balls expanded outward at 1,500 meters per second. The drone's frame shredded instantly. One striker down. The next FP1 was already diving. It passed 120 meters. The gun barrel tracked downward, firing perfectly. 110 meters. Still firing. 105. One more shell left the barrel. At 100 meters exactly, the system stopped. The barrel froze. The fire control computer had hit a hard-coded safety lockout. Below 100 meters altitude, the tungsten fragments would strike the refinery itself. Storage tanks, processing columns, pressurized lines. The system designed to protect the facility could trigger the exact catastrophe it was built to prevent. The lockout was coded into the firmware. No manual override. No combat exception. The Derivatsiya operator could see the drones. He could track them perfectly. His screen showed them diving below his floor, and his system refused to fire. 2 FP1 strikers crossed the threshold at 80 meters and dove toward the processing block. At 0537 hours, the first warhead struck the main crude distillation unit at the junction point intelligence had identified as the weakest link in the refinery's interconnected pressure system. The blast overpressure cracked the unit's feed lines. Crude oil at extreme temperature and pressure erupted from ruptured connections. The superheated liquid hit open air and vaporized almost instantly, a fuel-air mixture that needed only one ignition source to propagate through the surrounding pipe network. It found several. 10 seconds later, the second striker hit a storage tank whose seals had been flagged as degraded in commercial satellite imagery months earlier. The vapor space above the crude ignited. The floating roof, a steel disc weighing dozens of tons designed to sit on top of the liquid and suppress vapor, became a projectile, launched upward by expanding gases, arcing through the air before crashing down onto adjacent infrastructure. Tens of thousands of barrels of crude now sat uncovered, feeding an exponentially growing fire. The distillation unit's failure cascaded through the refinery's interconnected systems the way a blown fuse trips a circuit. Downstream units, starved of feed, experienced pressure drops that caused liquid hydrocarbons to undergo instantaneous phase change. One processing column split at its weld seams. The upper section separated and fell. Secondary explosions rippled outward. The shockwave punctured additional storage tanks. Emergency systems attempted to isolate sections, but the damage was too widespread, too fast. Pumps couldn't stop, because downstream pressure was gone. Valves couldn't close against backward flow. The fire suppression system had lost water pressure when the first blast severed its supply mains. 2 drones had gotten through, 2 warheads, and the refinery's own physics, its pressurized lines, its interconnected units, its stored energy in the form of hundreds of thousands of barrels of heated crude, did the rest. The facility didn't need to be bombed into rubble. It only needed 2 cracks in the right places, and its own operating pressure tore it apart from inside. Now look at the full picture, because the explosions are the least interesting part. First, the exchange rate. 28 drones launched. 19 survived to the final approach. 17 were destroyed by the defense en route, by interceptors, by the S-300, by Pantsers, by cannons, by GPS spoofing, by compass drift. Only 2 reached the target. Russia's defense killed over 90% of the strike package. And it didn't matter, because the 2 that got through started a chain reaction the defenders couldn't stop, couldn't fight, and couldn't enter. A 93% interception rate, a number most air forces would celebrate, was a strategic defeat. Second, the defense architecture was turned against itself. The S-300's recalibration gap, identified by a dead decoy. The Pantsers reload window, purchased by sacrificial UJ-22s. The Derivatsiya's own safety lockout, designed to protect the asset it was guarding. Every system's flaw was a feature built in by its own engineers. Not a defect, but a design choice that assumed the attacker would never be cheap enough to test it with expendable assets. Third, this was never an attack on one refinery. It was an attack on the decision cycle. 360 drones across a dozen targets, timed to arrive simultaneously, forced every Russian air defense commander to split attention, allocate scarce interceptors, and make irreversible choices with incomplete information. The Kostovo package succeeded not because it was unstoppable, but because the defense was answering 12 questions at once and could only get 11 of them right. The satellite imagery arrived within hours and showed what Russia denied for days. The main distillation unit destroyed, multiple storage tanks burning, processing capacity offline for months at minimum, hundreds of thousands of barrels per day of refining capacity gone, not to a cruise missile, not to a stealth bomber, but to a drone built with a hobby shop engine you can order online for $500. That's the number that keeps Russian planners awake, not the cost of rebuilding a refinery, the cost of knowing that the weapon that did it can be built faster, cheaper, and in greater numbers than anything designed to stop it, and that 2 getting through is all it takes. If the math behind this war interests you more than the footage, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And tell me in the comments, what matters more? The 93% of drones Russia shot down, or the 7% that got through? The answer depends on which side of the refinery wall you're standing on. See you in the next one.